My name is Catherine Williams. I'm 66 years old, widowed for over 2 decades, and retired after teaching high school English for almost 32 years in a quiet town in Washington. I live in the same house my late husband, Robert, and I bought when our children were still young enough to fall asleep on the couch after Saturday morning cartoons. It creaks when the wind hits just right and smells like old wood and lavender. And to me, it has always smelled like home. I suppose the fall itself wasn't all that dramatic. One careless step on a wet bathroom tile, one misplaced foot, and I was down before I could say, damn. I remember the sound of the ceramic soap dish shattering on the floor beside me. Shampoo spilled like tears. Everything after that was a blur of hospital lights and murmured voices. They said it was a minor concussion, just a precautionary overnight stay. Nothing serious, but what I heard during that stay, that's what cracked something deep inside me. I'd barely opened my eyes when I heard my daughter Sarah, my firstborn, my pride, outside my curtain, speaking far too clearly on her phone. "If Mom doesn't come back from this fully functional," she said with a strange chill in her voice, "we need to think about what to do with the house. It's just sitting there wasting value. I mean, it's not like she needs all that space anymore." Her words didn't sound cruel exactly, just calculated, practical. But to hear them while I was still in the hospital bed, barely conscious, something twisted in my chest. Later that day, her husband Mark arrived, all buttoned up and polished like he was about to negotiate a contract instead of visiting his sick mother-in-law. I overheard him ask the doctor, not even discreetly, "In the event that she doesn't recover mental competency, what's the process for establishing guardianship over her estate?" I stared at the beige ceiling tiles for a long time after that. Then came Jessica, Daniel's wife. Sweet on the outside, always smiling. "Did anyone check if your mom had a will?" she asked Daniel at my bedside as if I couldn't hear. "We should probably know that, just in case." Daniel said nothing, just shifted awkwardly in the chair next to her. My sweet son, always looking down when things got uncomfortable. The boy I once carried into his first day of kindergarten because he wouldn't stop crying. That boy was long gone. They all thought I was sleeping, or worse, fading. But I was listening to every word. That night, in the sterile silence of my hospital room, I made a decision that would change everything. I would pretend I had memory loss. Complete, quiet, polite confusion. Not the kind that scares people off, but the kind that makes them lower their guard and show you who they really are. Only 2 people would know the truth. Anne, my best friend of 42 years, who was more like a sister, and Dr. Martinez, a former student of mine, now a trusted physician. Anne tried to talk me out of it gently, the way she always does. "You don't need to test them to know what they are, Kathy," she said, her hand gripping mine. "I do," I whispered back, "because I need to know if they see me as a person or just a problem." What they didn't know, what Robert had made me promise, never to tell, was that I had nearly $8.5 million in long-held shares from his old software company. The money wasn't flashy, wasn't in any visible bank account. He left it for me to grow old with dignity, to be used only if I needed it. "Don't tell the kids," he'd warned me once, his voice tired but firm. "Not unless they've proven they won't use you to get it." I never planned to test them, not like this, until I had to. The first few days back home were a strange theater. Sarah fluttered about the kitchen like a concerned angel, fussing over my vitamins and appointments. Jessica brought flowers and passive-aggressive comments wrapped in lace. Mark asked more questions about my daily routines than any son-in-law ever should. But it was Nathan, my 13-year-old grandson, who broke my heart in the gentlest way. He crawled into my lap one afternoon, nestled his cheek against my shoulder, and said softly, "I like you better this way, Grandma. You don't make me practice violin or check my homework anymore." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Mostly, I wanted to scream that I was still in here, that I hadn't gone anywhere. That night, I stood alone in the bathroom, staring at my own face in the mirror. My eyes still sharp, my skin looser now, the deep lines around my mouth no longer, softened by joy. I reached up, touched the glass, and whispered, "I'm still here, even if no one sees me." I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too rehearsed in its stillness, like even the floorboards were pretending not to creak. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the words from the hospital still echoing in my head. If Mom doesn't come back fully functional, does she have a will? Guardianship process. It played over and over, a loop of betrayal softened only by Nathan's small arms around me earlier that day. I closed my eyes, willing myself not to feel it. But the ache came anyway. And like it often does in the middle of the night, memory crept in. There was a time when this house wasn't filled with tension, but with laughter. The echoes of Sarah's piano practice, Daniel's comic book battles staged in the hallway, the soft classical music Robert loved playing on Sunday mornings. I used to sit by the window with a stack of essays to grade and coffee gone cold, watching my children race through the backyard like wild animals. I was a mother, yes, but also a teacher, a woman with a mind and a voice. I taught English at the local high school, 30 years of Shakespeare, Morrison, and Hemingway. I was offered administrative positions more than once, assistant principal, even curriculum coordinator, but I never took them. I loved the classroom too much. I loved watching young people wrestle with truth and metaphor and leave my room slightly more curious than when they arrived. I was good at it, maybe too good. Sometimes I wonder if I gave too much of myself to students and not enough to my own family. Robert understood. He always did. He was a software engineer, quiet and brilliant, with a sense of humor so dry it went unnoticed unless you were paying close attention. He died when he was 52. Pancreatic cancer, the thief that it is. One day he was jogging in the neighborhood. The next he was too tired to lift a mug. By the time we caught it, it was already taking him apart from the inside. He had 8 months. I didn't cry at his funeral. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I was too busy holding everyone else together. Sarah was 18 then, already hardening into the woman she is now. Sharp, capable, beautiful, but with a coldness even then I didn't know how to melt. She grieved by throwing herself into ambition. Ivy League applications, business school, networking at 22. I was proud and terrified because I could see her building a world that didn't have room for softness. The first real fracture between us came 12 years ago. Sarah wanted me to invest in a tech startup she was backing with some friends in Seattle. Some transformative opportunity, she called it. I read the business plan. It was slick and full of buzzwords, but the numbers didn't sit right. I told her no, calmly, clearly, without judgment. "You don't trust me," she said. "I trust you," I replied, "but not this deal." She never asked me for money again. But from that day forward, something behind her eyes shifted. She started talking to me like I was an obstacle, not a parent, and then there was Daniel, my baby, my sensitive boy, the one who wrote poetry in middle school and cried when the neighbor's cat died. Somewhere along the line, that tenderness turned inward. After his father died, he unraveled. He dropped out of college, started drifting between jobs, then fell into pills. I remember driving him to rehab, his body thin, his jaw clenched, silence thick between us. "You think this will fix me?" he spat, not looking at me. "I think this will give you a chance," I said. He got clean for a while, then relapsed. Got clean again. But something in him never fully came back. His resentment grew. Resentment. Toward rules, toward expectations, and eventually toward me. "You just want a son you can show off," he told me one Thanksgiving when I refused to give him money. I want a son who wants to be well, I whispered, holding back tears. I don't know who he blames more, me for pushing, or himself for stumbling. Jessica entered our lives a few years after that. Sweet voice, polished manners, a kind of weaponized grace. She called me Mom almost immediately, hugged me often, always warm, but something about it felt intentional. The kind of woman who always knows which room she's in and how to own it. I wanted to love her. I tried. But she asked questions more than she offered stories. How big is this house again? Did Robert leave a lot behind? You must have had a great pension, right? At the time, I chalked it up to curiosity. But now I see it was always about information, positioning, strategy. And poor Anne. She's the only person who's ever stood with me without expecting something in return. She brought groceries when I had the flu, held my hand through Robert's last breath, and watched Nathan when I needed to rest during my own health scares. She's a good woman, and now Sarah, my own daughter, blames her for everything. You're the reason my mother distrusts her own children, she hissed at Anne once, thinking I wasn't within earshot. Anne just smiled the way only a woman who's buried her pride for peace can do. Later that week, Daniel muttered as he passed me in the hallway, "You're always in the way, you know that?" I didn't reply. I just looked at him and saw a boy still lost in a man's body. He couldn't meet my gaze. Jessica, always the actress, brought me tea that evening, sat down beside me, and patted my hand. "We're just worried about your future, Mom," she said softly. "We just want to make sure everything's in place." "What do you mean?" I asked in my best blank, foggy voice. "Well," she smiled, "like wills and things. It's not about money, of course. It's just about peace of mind." "Mine or yours?" I wanted to ask, but I stayed silent because silence, I was learning, reveals more than questions ever could. That night, I found Robert's last letter. I'd kept it in a small box beneath my bed, buried beneath old scarves and church programs. The envelope was worn, but the ink still fresh, his handwriting steady and strong. "Don't let the pain harden you," he wrote. "Don't let it make you cold. Love them even if it hurts, but don't let them take the parts of you I loved most. Your kindness, your light, your fire." I read it twice, then again, and then I tucked it back in the box, my fingers trembling. Not from age, but from something deeper. Not fear, not yet, but something close. The morning after I reread Robert's letter, the air felt sharper, as though something invisible had shifted. The fog in my mind, real or feigned, had cleared. I made my tea, just like always, sweetened with a single spoon of honey, and sat by the window, pretending not to notice the way Sarah walked through my house like it was already hers. She had brought pastries I didn't ask for and suggestions I hadn't invited. "We need to clear some of this clutter, Mom," she said in that falsely cheerful tone people use when they're trying to act like they're helping. "Too many little things lying around. It's dangerous, especially for someone in your condition." I smiled faintly, blinking slowly. Condition. She didn't even look up from the stack of books she was rearranging. "You know what I mean. Don't worry. I've got it handled. The books weren't clutter. They were mine." Some still had Robert's notes in the margins from when he stayed up late reading beside me. I said nothing, but something in me started ticking, the kind of slow, patient ticking that knew exactly where it would end. That day, I started placing a small digital recorder under the lace doily on the kitchen table, another behind the curtain rod in the living room. I had kept them from my days as a teacher, for when students tried to challenge a grade or parents accused me of favoritism, I knew how to gather quiet proof. I just never imagined needing it in my own home, from my own family. Nathan came over. After school, still in his blue sneakers and grass-stained jeans. He threw his backpack onto the couch like always and climbed into the chair across from me, dangling his legs. He had his father's eyes. Daniel's, when Daniel still smiled like he believed in something. He pulled a graphic novel from his bag, but hesitated. Then, with that disarming honesty only children possess, he said, "Mom says you don't know what's going on anymore." I raised an eyebrow slowly, keeping my voice light. "Oh? What did she say exactly?" He looked down, kicking the air. "She said not to worry if you say weird stuff, that you don't really get things now." He shrugged. "She said not to get scared if you forget my name or something." I placed my hand over his and squeezed gently. "What if I promised I'll never forget your name?" He looked at me wide-eyed. "Even if you get really, really old?" "Especially then," I said, and he smiled. Jessica arrived shortly after, all perfume and pastel sweaters. She greeted me with her usual syrupy sweetness, then began wandering from room to room, opening drawers she had no reason to touch. I thought, "I might help organize some things," she said. "The garage, the attic, that hallway closet. So many old boxes. We could clear space, make the house safer for you." I nodded vaguely, folding my hands in my lap, watching as she lingered by the antique writing desk. It hadn't been used properly in years, not since Robert. She ran her fingers over the mahogany surface like she was considering something. 2 days later, a man in a navy polo arrived mid-morning. "Antique appraiser," Jessica explained without looking at me. "We're just curious what some things might be worth, for insurance purposes." I let her talk. I even made coffee for the man while he poked around the ivory inlays and scribbled in a little notepad. I wondered if he realized the woman standing quietly beside him could recite Wordsworth from memory. Later that evening, I listened to the recordings. Sarah's voice was sharp, cutting through the static like glass. "If she doesn't improve, we have to act." I talked to Mark. "Once we establish cognitive decline, we can start the guardianship process." Daniel responded with a grunt, then, "And the house? She won't need it. That's what a facility is for. And let's be honest, she barely uses the whole thing now. We'd be doing everyone a favor. Then it'll be ours. All of it. We just have to be careful with timing." I sat in the dark after that, not crying. Tears felt like a luxury I could no longer afford, but feeling something deeper, something older. That strange fusion of sorrow and rage that lives somewhere between betrayal and mourning. I went to the closet and pulled out my sewing basket, the one Sarah had told me to throw away years ago. "You never sew anymore," she'd said. "It's just taking up space." But I'd kept it, tucked behind coats and memories. Sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light and pulled out a square of linen. With slow, practiced hands, I embroidered Nathan's name in deep green thread, small but sturdy, a gift for his birthday, something real, something he could touch and hold, even when the world felt full of pretend. The next day, Mark stopped. "Bye." His tie was perfectly knotted, his briefcase sleek. He spoke like he was discussing a new client instead of my life. "Just some forms, Mom," he said. "Standard things. Durable power of attorney, health proxy, just so we're covered." I stared at the papers, legal words blurred together. My name appeared too many times. "I don't understand," I said softly, keeping my tone clouded. He smiled reassuringly. "It's just to keep things in order. You wouldn't want anyone taking advantage of you, right?" I wanted to laugh. That night, I sat in my room and looked at the photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day. It had faded over the years, our faces softened by time. But I still remembered how his hand had trembled when he touched mine. How, he'd whispered, "We'll grow old together, or apart, but with love." I touched the frame lightly, my voice barely audible. "Am I doing the right thing, Robert?" There was no answer, of course. Just silence and the weight of everything he left me to carry, The house didn't feel like mine anymore. The walls were still the same soft cream I'd painted after Robert passed. The wooden floors still held the same familiar creaks, but the air had changed. It was thicker now, heavier, like it knew something I didn't want to admit. They scheduled a family discussion for Saturday evening. That's what Sarah called it, her tone clipped and managerial, like she was arranging a quarterly meeting, not planning the next chapter of my life without asking me. She brought her laptop. Mark brought a folder. Jessica arrived early with wine and a store-bought dessert, sitting on the counter with forced cheer. Daniel showed up late, as always, hair unkempt, sleeves wrinkled. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. That's how he is lately. Half gestures and unfinished sentences. They sat around the dining table like a board of trustees evaluating an underperforming employee. I took my usual place at the head, hands folded in my lap, eyes low, keeping my face soft, vague. I had to, Mark began, clearing his throat. Always the designated mouthpiece when Sarah didn't want to appear cold. Catherine, we've been thinking a lot about what's best for your comfort, your safety. It's time we consider long-term care options. Sarah chimed in without waiting. A memory care facility. The one we toured in Bellevue has a great reputation. Very clean, very modern 24-hour staff. It would take the pressure off everyone. Pressure off whom? I wanted to ask. Instead, I blinked at her, tilting my head like I didn't understand. Daniel leaned forward. If we wait too long, Mom, the house could lose value. The market's shifting. We could get ahead of it now, use the proceeds to fund her care. He trailed off, avoiding my gaze. I noticed he didn't say, your care. He said, her, as if I weren't in the room. Jessica placed her hand over mine gently. This house is too big for one person anyway. Too many stairs, too many chances to fall again. We're just worried. She smiled, but her eyes were calculating, watching for my reaction. I like my room, Nathan said quietly from the corner. He had been coloring in a sketchbook, mostly ignored. I don't want Grandma to go to a facility. Sarah laughed under her breath. You're not going anywhere, sweetie. We're talking about Grandma. Then she turned back to me and added, no one lives forever, Mom, especially not in this state. I stared at the grain of the wooden table, tracing it with my eyes, willing myself not to flinch. They thought I was lost in confusion, but I heard every word, every inflection, every thinly veiled insult disguised as concern. The conversation shifted to logistics. How to sell the house discreetly, how to transfer accounts, how to notify neighbors without alarming them. They spoke as if I had already disappeared, as if I had become paperwork and property. I sat through it all without a word. Later that night, while the house was silent again, I took out the little gift I'd been working on in secret. Nathan's birthday was in 3 weeks, but I wasn't sure I'd still be here by then. So I finished wrapping the small wooden box I'd painted, myself. Inside, the embroidered handkerchief with his name stitched in green, and a silver compass Robert once kept on his desk. So you'll always know where home is, I planned to tell him. But I knew there was a good chance I'd have to leave the message in a note instead. I tucked the gift beneath a loose floorboard in the back bedroom, his favorite hide-and-seek spot. I made a silent promise to myself. If they took me before his birthday, I'd find a way to get it to him, even if I had to pretend to forget my name while doing it. The next morning, Anne came by. She always knew when something was wrong before. I said a word. She brought apple muffins and her usual quiet steadiness. They met, I said, sitting at the kitchen table while she poured coffee. I know, she said. Sarah called me last night. Wanted to loop me in, as if I were part of some project management chain. I looked down, pressing a napkin between my fingers. She said I should prepare you emotionally, Anne added, her voice tightening. Like you were a puppy being sent away. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Anne reached across the table and gripped my hand. "You don't deserve this, Maggie." "I raised them," I whispered. "How did I get it so wrong?" "You didn't. They chose comfort over character. That's not your sin to carry." I felt a lump rise in my throat but swallowed it back. There was no room left for softness. Not yet. Later that day, I saw Jessica kneeling in the hallway with Nathan. They didn't see me standing by the stairwell. Her voice was sweet, like melted. "Sugar, Grandma forgets things now, right?" she asked him. Nathan nodded, unsure. "She sometimes tells stories that aren't true anymore, okay?" He hesitated. "That's okay, sweetheart," she continued. "You just have to be helpful. Like if she hides things or says something silly, you should tell Mommy and Daddy so we can help." "Her, okay?" He nodded again, quietly. My heart clenched. She was turning him into a spy. Innocently, unknowingly, she was poisoning his trust in me. It was so subtle, so polite, so deliberate. That evening, I sat in the living room alone, the house, feeling like a stage just after the curtain falls. All the actors had gone home, but their voices lingered. In the dim light, I picked up one of Robert's old books, The Poetry of Robert Frost. He had written inside the cover, "4M, in all seasons, find your fire when the frost comes." The frost had arrived and I could feel the fire starting to stir again, deep in my chest, slow but relentless. I didn't know how long I had before they tried to take everything. But I knew this much. They wouldn't see it coming. It started with the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. Anne had already come by the day before with her usual calm presence and cinnamon bread still warm in foil. The mail had already been dropped. I opened the front door slowly, the old hinges squealing a warning that no one else seemed to hear. On the porch stood a man in jeans and a windbreaker, holding a clipboard, smiling too broadly. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, stepping back as if I were fragile glass that might shatter with sound. "I'm just surveying the neighborhood for a safety audit. Mind if I ask a few questions?" I stared at him, silent. He shifted, glancing past me into the foyer. "Any elderly residents living in the home? Anyone with cognitive issues?" I blinked twice, slow and deliberate. "Are you the homeowner?" I said nothing. He gave a rehearsed nod, clicked his pen, and retreated down the steps without ever having gotten inside. But the unease lingered long after his footsteps vanished. I watched him walk straight across the street to a silver sedan I didn't recognize and speak to someone inside. The window rolled up before I could make out the face, but I didn't need to. I knew this wasn't about neighborhood safety. It was Sarah. She was watching me. Later that afternoon, Anne called, her voice tight, strained in a way I hadn't heard before. "A man followed me out of the bookstore today," she said. Didn't say a word, but he kept pace for 6 blocks. When I stopped to tie my shoe, he stopped too. I didn't say what we were both thinking. Sarah had started her endgame and she wasn't going to play fair. The air inside the house grew colder, heavier. Every sound felt sharper, every creak a possible mistake. Then came Nathan. He'd found my little recorder. It had slipped from behind. The curtain rod in the living room where I'd hidden it weeks ago. I didn't even notice it was missing until I walked in and saw him sitting cross-legged on the rug, fiddling with the buttons. "Grandma," he said, looking up with that proud grin only children have when they think they've found treasure. "You left this thing on. I heard Aunt Sarah say the F word." My stomach dropped. "Can I play it again?" Before I could stop him, the room filled with Sarah's voice, crackling but unmistakable. "If we get guardianship, we sell the house immediately. No more waiting on Mom's moods or memory lapses. She won't even notice." Then Jessica. "And the rest of the funds?" Daniel's voice. "She's not going to live forever." I lunged and hit stop, yanking the recorder from his hand. He looked confused, then worried. "Am I in trouble?" he asked softly. I was about to assure him when Jessica's voice drifted from the hallway, behind us. "What's that, Nate?" She walked in, holding a laundry basket, moving too quickly for someone just doing chores. Her eyes locked on the device in my hand. Nathan hesitated. It was Grandma's. It had Aunt Sarah's voice in it. Emily set the basket down. "Hey," she said, reaching out. I pretended not to understand, clutching it tighter, blinking like I was already somewhere else. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That evening, she cornered Nathan in the hallway. She thought I was asleep, but my bedroom door was cracked just enough. Her voice was low, sugar-laced, and sharp around the edges. "Why were you playing with things that don't belong to you?" "I didn't know," Nathan whispered. "It was just on the floor." "You're not supposed to tell people what you hear, sweetie. That's not polite." "Was it a secret?" "It was grown-up stuff. You don't want to get anyone in trouble, do you?" Then came the moment I wouldn't forget. "Do you want Grandma to go away forever?" she asked. He was silent. She lowered her voice further. "If you keep acting like this, Mommy and Daddy won't trust you anymore." I heard the soft, distinct sound of a slap. Not hard, but sharp enough to sting. Then his small voice. "Do you want her to disappear?" Silence. Then Jessica's shoes clicking. Back down the hall and a door closing. The next morning, Mark arrived unannounced. He had a brown leather folder and that practiced expression of concern he wore when pretending to be helpful. "I've been talking to Dr. Martinez," he said, sitting across from me in the sunroom. "Given the ongoing concerns about your memory, we've been working on the paperwork for a long-term declaration of incapacity. It's just a formality, really, so no one takes advantage of you." I nodded slowly, watching the light shift across the hardwood. "He's prepared to sign off. We're just waiting on your primary care assessment." I knew Martinez hadn't signed anything yet. He had promised me that much, but I also knew pressure could wear down even the well-intentioned. After Mark left, I pulled my journal from the bookshelf and flipped through the pages, checking for anything that might incriminate me. A list of names, a few notes about where I'd placed recorders, quotes I'd scribbled from my children's conversations. Enough to raise questions. That night, I found the journal sitting on the kitchen counter. Sarah's handwriting scrolled in the margin. "Unstable," she'd written. "Paranoia. Obsessive. Dangerous to herself. She wasn't asking." I held the page for a long time, then tore it out, shredded it into pieces, and flushed them down the toilet one by one. Anne came by the next morning, gripping the steering wheel with both hands longer than necessary before coming inside. Her mouth was tight, her eyes red. "They know I've been helping you," she said. "I know. They're going to try to cut me out. They already have." Anne placed a trembling hand over mine. "If you don't end this soon," she whispered, "they'll beat you to it. You can't wait until they've boxed you up and shipped you away. You're running out of time." I nodded slowly, but the weight of her words settled deeper than I'd let on. There was no safety net anymore. If I stumbled now, it would all come crashing down. Later that day, I got a call from the bank. "Mrs. Williams," the man on the line said, "we wanted to confirm a new line of credit application in your name, $45,000, authorized by your son, Daniel." I didn't speak. I just listened to the words, let them roll over me like waves too cold to scream through. "I'm sorry," the man said, "but we need your verbal approval, or—" I hung up. That night, I sat in the pew of the old stone church 3 blocks from my house. The sanctuary was empty, lit only by the dim stained glass reflections and the soft hum of an old heater. I folded my hands, not really in prayer, but something close. I didn't ask for strength. I asked for clarity. Dr. Martinez didn't ask questions when I handed him the note. He simply read it, folded it into his jacket pocket, and nodded once. I had written carefully in my smallest, clearest handwriting, "Confirm mental competency in private. Do not document in shared files. Trust only yourself." He understood immediately. He always had. There had been a time, years ago, when he sat in my English class and wrote essays that trembled with sincerity. Now he wore a white coat and wielded caution like a scalpel. But I saw that same boy in his eyes when he looked at me with quiet loyalty. He arranged for a cognitive evaluation disguised as a social visit. He brought a clipboard, of course, and spoke gently, keeping his tone even as he asked me to count backward, recall a sequence, describe a painting he pointed to on the wall. I passed, of course. I passed as I always would, because I was not slipping, not yet. He gave me the tiniest nod before leaving. I didn't need a printed report. All I needed was the truth, quietly confirmed, and one good ally with credentials. The rest I would gather on my own. The house became a stage again, and I resumed my role with precision. I let my hands tremble slightly when pouring tea. I murmured, nonsense under my breath, just loud enough to be overheard. I stared into the fireplace as if trying to remember what fire was. But every so often, I planted seeds. Small truths slipped into the haze. I began humming the melody Sarah used to play on the piano during her college auditions, the one she hadn't touched in 17 years. I asked Mark out of the blue whether his firm still handled estate fraud cases, just loud enough for Jessica to hear from the next room. And then, one afternoon, I waited until they were all seated in the living room, reviewing brochures for memory care facilities like they were choosing a spa package. I walked in, paused, near the window, and said dreamily, "I hope the new owners don't mind the old maple tree. It drops branches in November, especially after it rains, like last year." Sarah dropped her coffee. There had been a meeting, one I was never supposed to know about, exactly a month before, on a rainy Tuesday in early November. They'd gathered, in secret, discussing plans to sell the house, how and when to remove me, who would manage the transition. The maple tree had been mentioned casually in passing as something to deal with once the house changed hands. Sarah stared at me, her face drained of color. Her mug clattered on the floor, ceramic splintering like nerves. It was a Sunday, which somehow made it worse. Robert always insisted Sundays were sacred, not in the religious sense, but in the way a man who worked with numbers and code still believed in one quiet day a week for rest, family, and honesty. He used to make pancakes with too much butter, play jazz from the 80s, and read the paper in his robe, humming as if the world was good and steady. This Sunday, my family came over, with casserole dishes and tension dressed up as civility. Sarah brought that quinoa salad no one actually liked. Mark wore a blazer like he had just come from court. Daniel had a suspicious stiffness in his jaw, either from guilt or from another poor decision. Jessica arrived last, breathless and bright-eyed, holding a tray of lemon bars and compliments. The table was already set when I came down. I moved a little slower than usual because they expected that. The role still had to be played until the curtain call. They seated me at the head, as they always had. But this time it felt ceremonial, like they were preparing for a final blessing, one they wouldn't have to ask for much longer. We thought, "It'd be nice to have dinner together before the transition," Sarah said, pouring herself a glass of wine she didn't offer to anyone else. "You've had a lot on your mind lately, Mom, and we've all been thinking, it's time." Mark gave a short nod, eyes narrowed with false concern. "We've made the arrangements, the facility with the best care. You'll have your own room, activities, staff around the clock," Jessica chimed in with a practiced smile. "And no more stress, no more worrying about cooking, falling, forgetting appointments." I spooned mashed potatoes onto my plate and said nothing. Nathan sat across from me, smaller than usual somehow. his eyes darting between faces as if trying to understand the rules of a game no one had explained to him. Daniel reached for the bread, voice too casual. "We sold the Subaru, used the cash to put down the deposit for the place. Figured you weren't driving anymore anyway." I looked up at him fully, deliberately. His eyes faltered, flicking downward like he'd seen something shameful in a reflection. He didn't recognize. "I didn't say you could sell it," I said, and the room went still. There was a pause. Sarah laughed, sharp and uncomfortable. "Oh, come on, Mom. You don't even remember what day it is." I straightened in my chair. The slowness left my voice. The fog evaporated from my gaze. "It's Sunday," I said evenly, "and you've all come here to erase me." Forks froze midair. Daniel set his down with a metallic clink. Mark opened his mouth, then shut it again. Sarah's face twisted. "What game is this?" I reached beneath the table where my bag rested on the floor and pulled out a small portable speaker. Black, old, but powerful. I pressed play. Voices filled the room. Their voices. Daniel, impatient. "She's not going to live forever. We can't wait on her forever." Sarah calculated. "Once she's out of the house, we list it immediately." Quietly, before she confuses anyone with her stories. Mark. "If we use my firm, we can establish guardianship and bypass the asset freeze." Jessica. "Just don't let the kid get attached. She's not stable anymore." Silence followed, thick and absolute. The kind that only falls when something sacred has just shattered. Sarah stood up suddenly. "You were spying on us." I stared at her. "I was surviving you." Mark tried to recover. This isn't what it sounds like. Context matters. Those conversations were taken out of..." I cut him off. "Out of what? The months I spent pretending. To forget my name, or the days I listened to my own children negotiate the price of my dignity?" Jessica dropped her fork, voice tight. "We were trying to protect you by stealing from me?" I asked. "By burning a gift I made for your son?" Her face blanched. Sarah turned to Mark. "You said she was incompetent. You said the doctor had signed off." "He was going to," Mark snapped, sweat beading at his temple. "We just needed the behavioral records." "You said she couldn't string a sentence together," I said, "because that's what you wanted to believe." Jessica rounded on Daniel. "You were supposed to handle her. You said she'd sign the house over willingly. We did all of this for you, because you're too much of a failure to take care of your own mother without turning her into a bank account." Daniel's mouth fell open. "You said you loved her." "I said what I had to," she hissed. Nathan stood up. He was shaking. "You all lied to her," he said, voice high, breaking. "You lied and you're mean, and I hate all of you." He ran to me, arms wrapping around my waist with the kind of desperation that only comes when a child realizes something awful has happened and no one is going to fix it. I held him close, burying my face in his hair. Then I stood slowly, with him still clutching me. My voice shook for the first time, not from fear, but from the kind of grief that never stops bruising. "I believed," I said, looking at each of them, "that at least one of you still loved me. Not for what I had, not for what I could give, just for being your mother." Sarah looked away. Mark was already pulling out his phone, likely calling someone for damage control. Daniel sat frozen. Jessica wiped a tear, but even that seemed rehearsed. Didn't wait for their apologies because I knew they weren't coming. The house was quiet again, but this time it was the kind of quiet I chose. Not the hush of tension waiting to explode behind closed doors, not the silence of fear wrapped in pretense, just peace, the kind that follows a storm. They left in pieces. After that dinner. Sarah grabbed her coat without looking at me. Mark stood stiffly, mumbling something about legal misinterpretation, liability, mistakes. Daniel disappeared into the night with no words at all, just a shadow shrinking in the headlights. Jessica didn't say goodbye. She pulled Nathan's hand with more force than care, but the boy twisted free, ran back to hug me one last time. "I still want the compass," he whispered against my sweater. "It's already yours," I whispered back. 2 weeks passed before the letters went out, one to each of them. Sarah, Daniel, and even Mark, though he was only family by law and illusion. I wrote them by hand, using the stationery Robert had given me the Christmas before he passed. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with our initials embossed in the corner, C&R. I sealed each envelope, untouched by apology, but filled with something far heavier: truth. I left them blank on the outside. No names, no accusations. Just envelopes waiting for hands brave enough to open them. None of them did. I'd asked my attorney, a kind woman with tired eyes and efficient kindness, to arrange the transfer of my entire estate to a charitable foundation I renamed in Robert's honor. The Robert Williams Foundation for Education and Dignity in Aging. Every cent from my husband's old shares, every account, the house, the land, the car they had sold behind my back, all of it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted the narrative rewritten, not for me, but for the students who could not afford school, for the elders cast aside in locked rooms and called burdens by their own blood. And Nathan, my one unspoiled light in the chaos, he would have a scholarship fund in his name. The Nathan Compass Grant for Curious Children with Steady Hearts. I included a note for him in the foundation file. "This is so you'll always find your way, even if the people around you lose theirs." The fallout came in slow waves. Sarah tried to sue, of course. She hired a firm with marble floors and a website full of smiling estate experts. But the documents were airtight, the timeline documented, the recordings undeniable. Her case was dismissed before it reached a judge. Her name would hover in Google searches now, tethered to a failed guardianship claim and whispers of financial exploitation. Daniel, already deep in debt, collapsed under the weight of unpaid loans and mounting interest. He called me once, maybe twice. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but because I knew he wasn't ready to speak as a son, only as someone drowning, flailing for anything that floated. Jessica left him soon after, took their savings, the car, and their silence. Nathan stayed with his maternal grandparents. I sent him birthday cards through a third party, never with money, always with stories. Mark's name surfaced in a quiet investigation into legal ethics. One of my recordings, the one where he coached Sarah on how to nudge my diagnosis, made its way into the hands of a journalist. Anonymously. I didn't send it, but someone did. He was quietly let go, his firm citing a misalignment of values. No charges, no headlines, but the kind of stain that doesn't wash out of a resume. As for me, I packed what little I still cared to carry and left. Anne drove the U-Haul herself, refusing to let anyone else take the wheel. We didn't go far, just 3 hours up the coast to a town where salt air softened the edges of memory, and no one knew my name at the grocery store. We found a little yellow house with white shutters and wild roses growing like children along the fence line. The ocean was a short walk away, and I could hear it at night when the windows were cracked open. I slept deeply for the first time in years. I began volunteering at the library, then at a local community center that ran programs for underprivileged seniors. They called me Miss Catherine and didn't ask for anything except stories. I gave them plenty. Once a week, I taught a small class on writing. It wasn't anything official, just folding chairs, eager eyes, and the scent of old books. I told them that writing was not about showing off what you know, but surviving what you feel. They nodded, like they understood. One evening, near the end of a lesson about character and silence, an elderly woman raised her hand and asked, How do you forgive someone who doesn't want to be forgiven? I looked out the window at the setting sun and said softly, "You don't do it for them. You do it so you can keep walking." They were quiet after that. I think they felt the truth in it, even if they didn't know the story. Before we left, one of the students, maybe 70, maybe 75, asked me why I'd never published anything. I smiled. I wrote 3 decades of lessons in red ink. That was enough for me. At home that night, I lit a candle near Robert's photo. The glass frame glowed amber in the low light, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again, humming off key, laughing at his own terrible jokes. I sat at my desk and began to write. Not a will, not a warning, but a journal for no one and for everyone. The first line read, "Silence is not stupidity, forgiveness is not weakness, but trust, once broken, doesn't come back." And I kept writing, even as the waves hummed beyond the ball. Windows in the wind carried no more lies. 6 months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small wooden compass, clearly handmade, clearly loved. A note fell out, written in a child's careful handwriting. "Dear Grandma Catherine, I found your hiding place. Mom says I'm not supposed to write to you, but Grandpa taught me. Your new address. I'm sorry they were so mean. I still remember your real name and I always will. I made this for you so you won't get lost either. Love, Nathan P.S. I practice violin every day now because it reminds me of you. I held that compass for a long time, watching its needle find true north, and I realized something profound. The family we choose to keep is often worth more than the family we're born into." That night, I wrote Nathan back, care of his grandparents, and included a story about a boy who saved his grandmother simply by remembering her name when everyone else chose to forget. Because sometimes, being seen by just one person is enough to remind you who you really are. The house by the sea doesn't creak like the old one did. The floorboards are steady, the walls are thick, and when the wind blows, it sounds like breathing instead of secrets. Anne lives 3 streets over, and we have coffee. Every morning at 9 a.m. sharp. We don't talk about the past much. There's no need. We both know what we survived, and we both know what we chose instead. I still teach, in small ways. I still write, in quiet moments. And sometimes, when the evening light hits the water, just write. I can almost see Robert standing at the end of the pier, hands in his pockets, smiling like he's proud of the woman I became after he was gone. The woman who refused to disappear, even when everyone wanted her to. The woman who chose truth over convenience, dignity over comfort, and love over blood. The woman who learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to show you who they really are, and the courage to believe them when they do. The end.